Chag Sameach again. Now, despite the challenges of getting to the grocery stores this year, I'm sure like me, you still got enough matzah over these past 8 days. And like me, no matter how hard you tried to get just enough to last, you probably have plenty of leftover matzah that you now have no idea what to do with. We're all familiar with the idea of why we had to eat matzah. Our people left Egypt so quickly that they had no time to prepare. So they grabbed their kneading bowls and headed for freedom as fast as they could. They couldn't even wait for their bread to rise. But if we turn back to the beginning of Exodus chapter 12, we find something interesting. We find that Moses told the people 2 weeks earlier that they should prepare for the miracle to come. They knew they were going to be freed. So if the people had been told to prepare weeks in advance, why didn't they make some real bread? They had the time. They had plenty of time to do so. It would have made Passover so much easier. My friend, Rabbi Neil Lovinger, provides an interesting answer for us. Their failure to fully prepare hints at a truth about human beings. Change is often forced upon us by circumstance, even when we know it's coming. Change is often forced upon us by circumstance, even when we know it's coming. We find this truth in every realm of human life: religion, economics, environment, politics, health. We know intellectually that things cannot go on the way they've always have, but we often don't change our habits until we have no choice. And that lack of choice often comes faster than we can ever imagine, sometimes in what seems an instant. Years ago, on a trip to Seattle, I had the opportunity to visit the Gates Foundation. It's an incredible place, open to the public, where you can see all the extraordinary work done by Bill and Melinda Gates. There for anyone to see were large exhibits with clear illustrations of how unprepared we were for a pandemic, woefully unprepared. And for those who've never been to Seattle, Gates wrote numerous articles and gave an eye-opening TED Talk on the subject in 2015. He said 5 years ago, "What I've learned from the Ebola outbreak is very sobering. As awful as this epidemic has been, the next one could be much worse. The world is simply not prepared to deal with the disease, and especially contagious flu, for example, that infects large numbers of people very quickly. But I believe," he said, "we can prevent such a catastrophe by building a global warning and response system for epidemics. It would apply the kind of planning that goes into national defense, systems for recruiting, training, and equipping health workers, investments in new tools, to the effort to prevent and contain outbreaks. Preventing such a catastrophe," he concluded, "is well worth the world's time and attention. Making the right investments now could save millions of lives." He then went on to outline exactly what the world needed to do 5 years ago to prepare for what would eventually come. Unfortunately, as you know now well, those investments were never made. The warning signs were there. The experts were telling us what we needed to do. Our leaders on both sides of the aisle, in this country and countries throughout the world, knew exactly what they needed to do, but very few people really did anything. And now we're paying the price. Change is often forced upon us by circumstance, even when we know it's coming. As a human race, let us now learn our lessons for the future. And with all of that said, I do think it's different on an individual level. For example, as a rabbi, I've often seen that many of us don't like to make serious preparations, even if we know that drastic changes are coming. We like to believe that things can stay as they are, despite the obvious warning signs. It may be in our relationships. It may be in our businesses. It may be in how we conduct ourselves and our own health. Another example, in a hospital, I often see family members confronting spiritual, relationship, or moral distress only after a medical crisis. And it's easy to wonder, didn't they know this was coming? Yes, one could judge another unfavorably for putting off those reckonings. But as a rabbi, I've come to see that in many ways, on an individual level, it's simply human nature not to cross the sea, as it were, until Pharaoh's army pushes you to the shore. And yet too many fault themselves. I knew my loved one was not well. I should have done more to take care of them. I could have taken more precautions. Let us not be too hard on ourselves. It's simply human nature to wait, as it's been for thousands of years since our ancestors left Egypt. None of us wants to accept, for example, that a loved one could be seriously ill. We make haste when we have to do so because as humans, it's often too hard, if not impossible, to prepare for what we don't really want to think about. But then matzah comes along once a year to remind us that we have what we need for the journey. Sometimes all we can do is trust in God and go forward together, forgiving ourselves and each other for our frailties and our imperfections. Thus, matzah can be a symbol of our precious humanity, imperfect, but more than sufficient. And in this we can rejoice. On this last day of Passover especially, we remember those who've gone before us. No, they too were not perfect. At times, they too failed themselves and their loved ones in many ways. Sometimes by not making the appropriate preparations. Sometimes not making the changes they needed to make until change was forced on them. But we still love them for all they did do. We still cherish their memories. We cherish their memories especially today because of their imperfect humanity. We still treasure and sanctify those incomplete and limited blessings they did bring into our lives. Because often is the case, given the circumstances, they did their best. They brought their imperfect, but yet beautiful and still very treasured human blessings into our lives. They still taught us to move on in life even when we don't make the changes we need to. Let us use their examples as inspiration for us, and let us do the best we can to make the changes we need to. And when we don't, let us forgive ourselves, especially this day, on this day of Passover.